I'm Rahul Ravindran. I've been in the film industry for almost 50 years now. Started out as an actor purely accidentally. Always wanted to be a filmmaker. Finally got around to making my first film about 7 years back, I think it's been, yeah. And just had my third release as a filmmaker as a girlfriend. And before I introduce myself any further, and I don't think any more introduction is needed, I must say, I remember reading your piece. I think I read it the second day of release, if I'm right. Must have been. And it was absolutely astoundingly well written. It was one of the best technical breakdowns in the film I've seen. No credit to the film, credit to your writing. And it was such a good piece. It was so thought provoking that some of it was creepy almost. Like, how did this girl get an in on some of the conversations I was having with my HODs and my actors? I was like, how is she like some of the words that we were discussing were used? And some of it was, you know how it is that, you know, when you start writing something and then you start going and making it, if you do understand your material well enough, there comes a point when all of you is all, you know, completely connected with that material, and you start making many instinctive choices that aren't necessarily always consciously thought out, but they're instinctive choices because you know doing it another way is not right for the film, and you aren't necessarily consciously thinking them through, but you beautifully articulated some of the instinctive choices I had made, or some of the actors had made, or some of the technicians had made, and it helped me understand my own instinctive choices better. And some of it was either so subconscious and so subliminal that I didn't even know I was making a choice there. And for you to interpret that, I was like, I wish I could take credit for that, but I can't because it wasn't something that I had put thought into. But again, like I said, I think if you understand your material well enough and if your intentions are clear, then your instincts start guiding you in a certain manner. It was fascinating to read how you had broken down some of it and to understand my own instincts, and like I said, to be creeped out by how does this girl know what conversation I had with my cinematographer or my sound designer. So astoundingly well written piece. You are going to make a fabulous film journalist if that is what you want to be. But how keen some of your observations were and how keen your understanding of some of the creative choices that go into making a film were, I think you would make a really good filmmaker and writer at some point if you choose to be that. So good luck with your career, and thank you for making our day. I remember reading it, I remember showing it to my wife, and then I sent it to Rashmika immediately. I remember sending it to KV, and it was just so nice. You know, there are a lot of the creative decisions that go into making a film that you don't want to be consciously processed by an audience. You just wanted to enhance the narrative. You wanted to create a certain emotional impact and just very gently create perception of the characters, of the story in the audience's minds. But you want someone to sit up and take notice of it and to articulate it like that. So yeah, it made a lot of us very emotional about all the hard work and what I sometimes call overthinking that went into the making of the film. So thank you for that piece.
I have been possibly writing for half of my life.
Okay.
So getting a recognition for it is neat.
Oh no, it meant even more to us. For the film to be acknowledged and recognized so passionately, like you had done. Thank you.
So starting with the questions, the first one would be, so the entire movie is based on the spatial ceramics, the doorways or the enclosed rooms. How did you narrow down what kind of space are you going to show on stage and what is that unseen?
Some of it was on paper, and some of it obviously. There's quite a bit that starts changing in terms of staging and execution when you actually zero down on a location. Because when I'm writing my first draft on paper, I don't have an actor in mind. I'm very rarely writing with specific actors in mind. I think with this one, the only two actors I had in mind very specifically was that the father would be played by Rahul Ravindran and the mother would be played by Rahul Ravindran. Those were the two actors that I had in mind while writing. But other than them, at that point, I had no idea I was going to be making with Rashmika. Thank God we did. So a lot of it especially when you're writing a character-driven drama like this, you want to be an honest servant of the characters. You don't want to start manipulating them and bending them to your will too much. So about 10 pages in, you know where you're going, you know what you want to tell through the story, but you largely want to let your characters navigate those situations and tell you how to write them rather than the other way around. I think that sensitivity and empathy to the characters that you're creating is very important when you're writing a character-driven drama. So a lot of the spatial semantics come from understanding your characters. Especially when you're writing someone like a Bhooma, who I remember one of the first discussions I had with him when we were prepping for the character is that I said, I remember mentioning this in another interview as well. I said, for a normal person, when they're asked very normal questions like, hey, would you like to eat at this restaurant? Or would you like to buy a set of clothes? Or would you like to watch this film? The first reaction to that is usually, would I like to do this or would I not? Is this what I want or is this not what I want? Therefore, is it a yes or a no? And I can tell you that for a person like Bhooma, given the kind of parenting that she was exposed to and how she was raised, her first reaction to everything is, would I get into trouble with my dad? Would I have to explain myself to my dad? If that is going to be the case, even if there's a 10% doubt of that happening, let me not do it. And having been raised like that from a very young age, your first instinct to everything is from that lens, through that lens. And therefore, unfortunately, you've buried your own feelings and likes and dislikes and wants and desires so deep down that you're not even in touch with them. And you feel them, but you're not in touch with them to the point that you can process them, and therefore there's no chance that you can express them. So when you're writing a character like that, a lot of it had to be expressed in an unspoken manner. They couldn't be expressed verbally, so a lot of it had to be expressed through the spatial semantics of the film and how we were going to frame her and what kind of lensing we were going to use and how that lensing would progress through the course of the film and in trying to create a certain perception of the character as well as create a certain mood for the story that the audience watching is able to feel, even when Bhooma is not able to express herself. So a lot of it was guided by that. For example, this simple, it was written on paper, it was on paper in my first draft, I remember. The simple thought of, incidentally in my first draft, I think even in my final draft, the breakup scene happens in Bhooma's room. But Bhooma, as soon as Vikram walks out, Bhooma gently walking up to the door and latching the door was written on paper. Because to me, it's a surefire sign of where she is mentally. And just showing these things, sometimes, some days I wake up thinking, especially when we were having arguments in edit, I'm like, does it even make sense? Is it even important? Am I really conveying anything through it? And then some days you're so sure, you're like, no, it's needed. These are the things that make this film and this character unique. These are the things that you won't get to see in another film. I'm not saying that makes this film superior. I'm just saying that it's what makes this film unique. It's what makes this film a story that nobody else will tell this way. Somebody else might be able to tell it in a superior manner, but it's what makes this uniquely Bhooma story, right? So a lot of these choices, for example, this choice of her having to walk up a staircase, bearing load. The first time you see her as Mother Earth, load-bearing Mother Earth, Varam Mostuna Bhooma Devi. Now, I'm thinking I want audiences to see her as Varam Mostuna Bhooma Devi for the first time, and also use that moment to establish a character trait where she's not even able to open her mouth and verbally ask for help. And it just leaves a certain, it's one of the pieces of the jigsaw that you're setting up slowly through the film. Now why a staircase? It just felt right? I remember the first draft had her lifting a cooler, an air cooler that she's hired for the summer, to her room. And the staircase was smaller, but then we started going and doing location recce, and I said, hey, you know what? I think it's better to have her going up a staircase with suitcases and all the baggage rather than an air cooler. Some of these are things you're visualizing as you're writing, and some of these are things that you're discovering as you start finalizing locations and as you start finalizing actors and costumes and props and things like that. So I remember I think you had pointed out beautifully how we used the to-do board as a prop in the film, and I'm so glad you picked it up. If you remember at the beginning of the film when Vikram comes into a room, it's very creepy by the way. You've seen it in 1,500 meet cute love stories, and I knew nobody would bat an eyelid at that point. And there's this little red fabric in the background as he's entering her room.
There's
But it's
some sort of redness going everywhere.
everywhere. As he's entering her room, a practical stranger when she's not even there in her room is an extremely creepy thing to do. And yet I've seen it in so many films being passed off as cute. And I said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm not for a second judging those films. And a lot of them were made in an era where I guess it was okay. We didn't have a collective realization that, hey, something like this is creepy. But yeah, come back to the point. The first time he walks into a room and you see the to-do board, this is a woman who spent 1 year in college away from the influence of her father, under the influence of Vinay and Harshita, who's maybe not begun to come into her own, maybe not begun to blossom, but she is in a safe space. So she's reached a point where she's a much better version of Bhooma than she was until she stepped into that college. And she will soon regress as Vikram takes the place of her father in her life. But little things like that. You want that prop. I don't. If I remember right, that prop wasn't on paper. But once we got a sense of what Bhooma's room would be like, I said, yeah, I wanted to do things board on that. In that room and how the items on that to-do list start changing, starts reflecting her mindset and her the slow erasure of her own identity. So little things like this. Like I said, some of them you stumble upon as you're staging the film, and some of it, it's down on paper and you're clear that you want it to be a certain way. So, yeah. Like the way Vikram hugs Bhooma, for example, or the journey that the dupatta has in the film, when it starts shooting, or when it's up here, and when it's more open, and when she finally loses it, and things like that. Those things were on paper. Incidentally, I had the dupatta throughout the film on paper. The final payoff when she doesn't take it, we had shot the shot where Anu brings Bhooma in, and we forgot to leave the dupatta there, and we forgot to give Rashmika dupatta in her hands, if I remember right. And I remember it was my stylist suggesting that let's put the dupatta there. So yeah, little things like that. So many inputs from so many people. I think one thing I find is very important when you're making a character-driven drama like this, that's largely psychological, that's largely playing out in the minds and the gut of the characters, is that you get all your technicians fully clued in, right? I'm anyway that kind of filmmaker. I like getting all my HODs fully clued in. The first thing I do is force them to read a script, even if they ask me for a narration. I say, no, read a bounce script. And that way, when they're fully clued in, they start taking ownership of the film as well. And so many of them come to you with so many inputs that starts enhancing the film. Like, I remember KV coming to me, and he'd developed an arc for how he would use light and shadows. Light and shadows through Bhooma's arc in the film. And little things like this, when you get your HODs fully clued in, they start coming in and they start elevating the storytelling. So yeah.
I also mentioned in the story that we gave him 80 pages. So 80 pages was like a lot. How did you?
It was actually my shortest script, ironically. Because I write my action parts in great detail. I did with this one too. And yet it was a pretty concise script. Yeah, it was about 82 pages. My first draft. I think it ballooned to about 92 pages by the last draft. But yeah, sorry, you had a completely question.
No, I was just curious that let's say the entire 80 pages, did you have to like break things down, or did that happen first? How was the collaboration?
With who specifically?
Cinematography.
A cinematographer, so no, I write my action part in great detail. Maybe someday I share the script. So I write my action part in great detail, and sometimes I don't start putting pen on paper until I've seen the entire film in my head. And sometimes even the short division with great detail. for certain scenes, like I know that the short duration is going to be in a certain manner, right? So sometimes it's left open to interpretation so that there's room for us to improvise on the set. Um, so I didn't break it down stage by stage, but you will start realizing that it's going stage by stage, and Bhooma's arc has a certain progression the way I write my screenplays. So what I did was give KV that very detailed screenplay, and and then he came back to me from a point of view of once he read it, we had discussions on the phone where I was telling him that, here's our protagonist whose eyes the story is being told through. She comes to college, a certain girl, and the story really after the prologue begins 1 year later. So you're meant to understand that she spent 1 year in that college, and she's now become a certain girl. And from there, Vikram starts taking the place of her father in her life, and she regresses into her shell again. To her finally realizing that she's actually uncomfortable in this, to her finally trying to communicate that and not being able to her being able to communicate it, and then finally the eruption at the end. So it was pretty evident the way I made it. So we had these discussions on the phone. So based on these discussions we had on the phone, in fact he'll come down to meet me once as well. Based on all these discussions, he came back to me with how he's going to split the script in his mind. Now again with my sound designer, I had the same discussion. I sent him the script, got him to read it, and then broke it down in my head. I was breaking down how what Bhooma's arc is and what Vikram's arc is, and how the arc of the story itself progresses and things like that. So then he was seeing it in his own way, and then he would come back to me with his inputs in terms of how we can see. You need to have the intention. You need to have the intention and understanding as to how you're progressing and where you're going. Once that happens, then all these technicians start coming with their own interpretations of how they would like to interpret this arc through their craft, right? So I remember Shravya coming back to me with Shravya and I would have these discussions about the graph of the dupatta itself, how sometimes it will be choking her neck, and how when she's with Bhooma, with Durga, it's worn slightly differently. And then there are, of course, you don't want to do things for the sake of doing it. Sometimes doing something for the sake of doing it, if it feels false for that scene, then you say, what, it doesn't matter. Let's just keep it real. So then Shravya came back to me with her interpretation of the whole art and the whole graph and what kind of, I was discussing, I was saying, imagine it's Mother Earth going through these various seasons, and I remember how she wanted to interpret it through the choice of colors, and at one point the colors are more hopeful of, lots of little buds that are yet to blossom, and then they start becoming colder at one point, the colors, and so it's sort of that. So little things like that, all these, all these finally come together to hopefully tell a story effectively. So did I answer your question? Yeah.
So Vikram has a different sort of emotional gravity. So while writing, which part of it was different? Like the part where he knows what he is, or the behaviours, subtleties that he exhibits without himself.
I don't think anything was particularly difficult. Like, I don't remember getting stuck in here or breaking my head over it. Because, like I said, for me it's very important that I start writing only after I've developed the story completely in my head, in great detail in my head. And in a character-driven drama like this, that happens only when you've developed a complete understanding of the characters that you're writing. So, I've seen many Vikrams in my life. Like I've said in many interviews, I've written Vikram with a lot of empathy, as weird as that might sound. Even how he's the antagonist of my film is, I take a clear side by the end. And yet, I like to think I hold him with a lot of empathy. So once I had a very clear understanding of Vikram and what his childhood would have been like, why he grows into this young adult that he is in a way that he is, I don't think any part was particularly challenging. I think the only part that was challenging for me was, I remember getting, I finished reading the script and I sent the script to a bunch of people to get feedback, the first draft. This time a lot bigger number than I usually do because I made it a point to send it to a lot of women to understand if I've gotten the point of view of that girl right, and if I've done something that as a man I'd never understand, but something big that I missed or something that I've gotten terribly wrong. And luckily, nobody came back to me with any feedback. There was one feedback that maybe at some point we can discuss in great detail. It was about the post-climax sequence. That's the one feedback I got because it was written very differently in that draft. And the one feedback that most women came back to me with wasn't about Bhooma. They said, "You've got Bhooma spot on." But they said, Vikram, 50% of them said, don't you want to give Vikram more redeeming qualities? Don't you want to give, we do fall in love, or we believe we fall in love and we get stuck in relationships like this because such men also do tend to have redeeming qualities. And don't you want, in my head, I think I had given certain redeeming qualities, but I didn't want to go overboard with it because there at that point, as a man, I knew that even though some of these women wanted me to give Vikram more redeeming qualities, I knew that as a man, if I had given him more redeeming qualities, there would be a certain section of men that are going to watch the film that is very important for me because I want them to go back home and reflect. That would side with Vikram, that would empathize with Vikram, and that they would see the story very differently. And my whole idea was to get them to see the story from Bhooma's point of view. So I knew that they would see Vikram very differently and this entire story very differently. I think that was the challenge because I was getting so much feedback from so many people. I was like, should I give him more redeeming qualities? But I was like, no, I was very clear about one thing, that what was more important to me than people who were anyway going to agree with the point of view and the politics of this film, giving me a pat on the back, that wasn't as important to me as getting people who would vehemently disagree with the politics of the film to go back home and reflect, to go back home and think about the film. Even if they wanted to vehemently argue with me, to spark a discussion, to spark a debate, to force a conversation. That was more important for me, and I didn't want to lose sight of that. And I knew that that was going to be more important for me because I didn't want it to be one of those niche films that barely made any money at the box office, that didn't cause an impact as much as it should, and that was only appreciated by people who anyway agree with the point of view of the film, right? And to me, that would be an opportunity loss, and I didn't want that. So I think that was the one challenge. I was like, should I go more nuanced? It could have been very easy for me to write a lot more obvious redeeming qualities for Vikram, but I said, you know what, it's okay. I'm not going to give in to that. I don't want to do that because this is more important to me. Not so much because of, I'm so glad it's made the box office it made, and I don't think it would have had a little, an even more nuanced film. But even more than that, the conversations that it started, how it's taken certain topics more mainstream. You're seeing accounts and handles on Insta and Twitter that couldn't normally discuss certain topics, suddenly discussing these topics. And that to me was more important. And I'm glad that's happened. So that was the challenge with Vikram, not.
Like the little nuances. For example, I was supposed to ask this later on, but since it connects. Vikram and Bhooma share different belief systems.
Right.
For example, Vikram thinks that cheating and probably raising a hand on her is something wrong.
I'm sure she believes that's wrong too, yeah. I don't think she would Vikram raising a hand on her, but yeah.
But he keeps expressing how I didn't do this, so I must be a good better. It's what he makes himself believe. And Bhooma is someone who still is trying to figure out. I'm not sure if this was the intention, but both of them have different love languages, and they haven't had the space to explore or even understand them. So, when someone comes from a belief system that have different social conditioning, did you ever think of being explicitly putting them in a social strata or a class? Because you haven't showed their parents as what do they do? I agree that Rahul appears twice on call, but we don't know what he does. And we don't even know.
I gave a brief sense of it. He's basically a store manager at a jewelry store. So yeah, he's a store manager for one of the branches of a jewelry brand. So yeah.
So I believe that all of
which had its own reason for that decision. We get to that. Yeah.
Yes. So especially belief systems and social conditioning, I was thinking that every time there would be a moment of tension or confrontation, or there's some sort of fight going on between the father and the guy as well. Not once have you brought up something like you're like this because your mother raised you like that, it's because of your father. There's no pointing out of parental influence. Why is that?
There was no pointing out because I'm making a film about young adults who probably not at the maturity level they need to be to understand that this is the issue. So it didn't resonate right for them to be saying it verbally. But I am making a film where I want the audience to understand, right? And judging by all the feedback and judging by how so many people have picked up on it and started those conversations, clearly that came through. It was very important for me that people understand that both these characters are products of their environment. Both these characters are products of the kind of parenting that they've been exposed to. And in a sense, not too different. Both of them are, in their own ways, victims of patriarchy. Just very different brands of it. And yet they're defined by how they were raised, like most of us are. That's something that I, with life experiences, realize that most of us, the scars we carry and the patterns we need to snap, the things that we need to heal from, the things that we need to be self-aware of, all go back to childhood. All of them go back to childhood. So for me, it didn't feel right for, and I when it comes to handling this particular scenario in the film, I feel Rahul Ravindran's character is also pretty immature in the sense that one thing I've realized with parents is, from experiences in my own extended family, is that when they are dealing with all of us as human beings, as mature as we may be, as calm and centered as we may be, when we're dealing with a situation for the first time, it gets the most immature out of us. And he is dealing with these situations for the first time in his life. For the first time in his life, his complete and absolute control over his daughter is questioned, is threatened, is challenged. And he's dealing with it for the first time. It's getting the immature worst out of him as well, right? I don't think he is in an emotional state where he's able to look, zoom out and understand this.
It happens the second time actually. Once when she was still a kid, he refused to eat his food and just sulked on bed. So it's been there since she's growing up.
And he's clearly a very self-centered man who in his own way, his needs are that I must be the center of the universe of my daughter. And that is a very important need for him. And as long as his daughter is fulfilling that need, it's okay. So he's clearly not a very self-aware, centered man anyway. I mean, I think a self-aware, centered, mature human being would start unlearning a few things and stop being a narcissist. But he clearly hasn't. So it didn't feel right for any of these characters to verbally be pointing these things out. And it's not even something where I consciously said, hey, do I want someone to say this? It just very subconsciously never crossed my mind because it didn't feel right. These are the kind of decisions where, it must be vague for people listening when I say you become a servant of the characters and you bend to their will rather than the other way around. These are the kind of creative decisions I'm talking about. Right? Where you instinctively know it's wrong for a character to say something because they've not had that realization yet. Right? So, like you pointing out that Vikram doesn't cheat her and he doesn't abuse her and he doesn't cheat on her. In his mind, that makes him the world's greatest boyfriend. In his mind, he's an upgrade on his father. My father is an amazing man. He was an amazing husband. Yeah, he used to be. That's okay for that generation. But I'm even better because I won't even hit my girlfriend. And in his head, he's the world's greatest boyfriend. So he's like, why on earth would my girlfriend want to break up with me? Why on earth would she not be happy in this relationship? That is the extent of his understanding, right? So in a sense, there is obviously no way a guy like Vikram is going to have a realization so strong and deep that, oh, I am like this because I grew up watching my father treat my mother a certain way. So yeah, it's instinctively these decisions start guiding you. So like never once did I say, hey, do I want? It was important for me to convey this as a writer, but instinctively I always knew my characters couldn't be saying these things out aloud. So, and imagine there are a lot of people who come and ask me, why did Bhooma just cut him off and right at the beginning? I'm like, there you go, yeah. Actually, when it's somebody like Vikram, because you're telling yourself, yeah, he doesn't hit me,
You never know how he's going to react.
and no, we'll come to that. That's the other side of that decision making. But right at the beginning of the relationship,
You are scared.
that's one. She knows instinctively that this won't go well when she breaks up with him. She knows it. But that comes much later, right? Beginning, you're like, yeah, he's so popular, everybody seems to love him. Clearly, there's nothing wrong with him. So if I think there's something wrong with him,
Yeah, something.
I'll be in your head.
Yeah.
And secondly, it's like, okay, I want to break up with him. Why do I break up with him? But yeah, he's never hit me. He never cheated on me. He's never uttered one abusive word at me. And it feels like you don't have grounds that are strong enough for you to break up with him. So it takes time. And most boomers, even in the end, don't end up breaking with their mate.
Yes.
And most boomers who are men stuck in a toxic relationship don't end up breaking with their women. For very different reasons. They may not be physically intimidated, they may not be physically scared of the war, or they may be, but more importantly, they are scared of the drama that will erupt. They are scared of dealing with the consequences. They are scared that this person will go paint a picture of me being a horrible person, and I don't want to deal with that right now. So there's so many reasons why. So I think these were all the decisions that went into not having them verbally say it out loud to each other or to themselves. So in fact, I was prodded by different members of the team at different points in the film to verbalize certain things. I said, no, I won't. It just doesn't make sense. For example, the scene with the mother. The whole idea of staging that mirror scene that way was that I don't remember now if there was always a single cut in my script itself, but I knew what I was going for when I was writing it. I didn't go into too much detail because sometimes when I have something in mind, I don't go into too much detail at a screenplay level because I also want people reading it to read it like a story rather than disconnecting with the story because I've gone into 2 paragraphs of explaining my short breakdown. So when I know that I'm going to remember something for sure, I don't go into great details for the simple reason that I want people reading the script to be able to read it like a story. Especially with this one, because I knew that I was going to send it to at least 10-15 women to understand if I got the point of view right. So I knew that a lot of these women would be women who have nothing to do with cinema, who don't understand the technical nuances of making a film. So I didn't want to bore them with dry details of how I would be shooting a certain scene or staging a certain scene. So there were a lot of women that I sent to that have absolutely nothing to do with cinema. It's Does that make sense? Does that answer your questions?
You're actually talking. It's like, yes, please go on. It's so much like, we don't want to stop you. Like, we just can't. I don't feel like it's like reading a book and just like answering it all.
Is this so?
You're answering all of our questions without actually asking.
Okay.
I don't think it's easier, but it's actually like, sitting down and listening, which I love doing. So.
Thank you.
And you actually covered that point of like, how Bhooma's father and Vikram both share the same kind of emotional patterns but different temperaments.
Different ways of manifesting.
Yes.
That quality, yeah.
As a daughter, she probably wanted to escape from her dad's shadow or the behavior, but again, that's where she landed. Same happened with Vikram as well. Like, what you're running from is what you run into.
Yeah.
He became his father, but he just does not seem to realize it. So,
he doesn't become it, he is it.
Yeah.
Both those men are one and the same. It's just that, if you remember, every time Vikram's trying to gaslight Bhooma in the film, and every time the father's trying to gaslight Bhooma in the film, they have the same steps, they do it in reverse. The father starts at point A and goes to point B. Vikram starts at point B and comes down to point A. So it's usually Vikram ends up emotionally blackmailing her. The father begins with emotionally blackmailing her. So it was written very consciously, the flow of dialogues and how they, for example, if you look at how the conversation, it's not even a conversation, it's a monologue at that point because Bhooma she doesn't know what she's been hit by and she's just standing there taking it all in. When he's trying to convince her to cut Vinay out of her life, it's very carefully written in a certain manner where he starts with very casually saying, you don't know, you're such an innocent little thing, cut him out of your life. And he realizes he's not getting an affirmative response from her. So he then resorts to giving her a practical reason why she should cut him off. He still doesn't get an affirmative response. Then he resorts to emotionally blackmailing her, saying, how do you think people would look at me if you still get friends with a guy who likes you? And he realizes even that's not cutting, he says, forget that, how do you think I would feel? And in his head, the minute I drop that line, you should drop everything else and say, yes, Vikram, done, I'm going to do this for you. And he's extremely bitterly disappointed when even to that she doesn't give him a yes, I will cut him off. And Dikshit is so good in that scene. If you look at his response to that and how he changes the topic, and he says, Mirchi Bajilu, Mirchi Bajilanta, he is so good in that scene. And with Vikram, in a weird sense, he has more agency over her. So he says, okay, if I can't get her to cut him off, I will take care of things myself. And the next thing you know, he's going to that boy's room and slapping him and emotionally blackmailing that boy to getting into it. If you notice, there is a pattern of speech in how he talks to Vinay also. He says, who was an amazing girl, right? And కొంచెం ఎంక్వైరీ చేస్తే చెప్పారు I love that girl, కొంచెం ఎంక్వైరీ చేస్తే చెప్పారు నీకు కూడా అట్లా ఏమంటారు కదా. But so he always starts like that. The father is kind of opposite. He'll start with the emotional blackmail and end with a more aggressive response. Like if you look at the 4-scene block of the film where the father enters the hostel and goes out of the gate, it's exactly in reverse. He starts with a certain aggression and then ends up with sort of a thing. So yeah. And my God, I remember the discussion I was having with Rahul Ravindran when he was doing that scene was that, sir, your control over your daughter, your absolute possession of your daughter has never been challenged. You're a single parent. She has always done sweetheart things to the point that she doesn't know what she wants. And suddenly that is threatened. So initially you don't even feel threatened. You slap this guy, you have complete authority, you slap this guy, you behave like, even though that's not your space, you behave like you own that room, Bhooma's room. You behave like you're the king of that room. And you slap him and you grab your daughter's hands and you drag her out of there. And Vikram gives in. There's a pattern of how the dialogues flow, even with the father. He will always first reason of saying, I understand. He plays on Nenu Ilagi Jasta. I was very consistent with how Vikram's dialogues play out. And then he slaps him again. Now they've met their match. So when Vikram comes down and he, for the first time, blocks the father physically, and for the first time he pulls his father's hands out, and the father is limp and impotent there, literally. He realizes he can't physically overpower this boy. For the first time, he's in a battle for the custody of his daughter. And he realizes he can't get his way, not physically. And he says, sir, I want your soul to be destroyed. I want to see utter humiliation in your eyes. And the way he holds his head down and you can see that he feels important in that moment. He is incredible how he interpreted that. And from there I told him, you look down and you're like, how do I really control my daughter? Because he's just screamed, get the fuck out of here on your face. And you don't have an answer to that because you're suddenly feeling important physically. And you look down and I want you to have a flash in your head that says, yeah, fuck this kid. I'm sorry about the language, but I am still the parent. I pay her fees. I still have something over her that he doesn't. I can go ask for a TC and drag her back home. And in that moment, his head goes up again and he says, Tabro! And he pushes the boy aside. He says, I don't need to deal with it. He has a realization that, why am I standing and dealing with him? I don't need to. Bacha hai. And he goes to the HOD. So, and if you look at how Bhooma's framed throughout that sequence, the most important character in that sequence is Bhooma. There are two men fighting for the custody of her destiny. And yet, if you look at it, there isn't one close-up shot or one reaction shot for Bhooma. throughout that sequence, she's always out focus, framed between these two men, almost crushed between these two men. And I kept telling Rashmika, you are the most important presence in the scene. And yet, you're the one I'm never going to rack focus to. You're the one I'm never going to cut to a close-up shot of. You're the one I'm never going to give a reaction shot to. And I want to show through the staging and the shot division that how you are completely irrelevant to these two men. The only thing relevant to them is control over you. And it was shot in that way where until the father walks out of that hostel block, you'll always see Bhooma between these two men looking irrelevant, and she's just screaming and screaming, saying, Vikram, please, Vikram, Nana. And he doesn't give a shit. The father doesn't give a shit. So yeah, it's just making me go back and I'm getting a little nostalgic about shooting those scenes, and it's
So,
just
would you agree that it's just too fragile ego that
exactly
like
that.
a big slash?
Exactly that. Exactly.
I think it was like, if I could recall, it was in Ramyan's interview that you mentioned about carving animal animals and how human evolution and the entire emotional vocabulary.
Right.
Had we think that example in the version, all the characters are shades of grey, especially the men. They have shades of grey going on. But somehow the language of cinema and the way society views cinema, we are always used to the blacks and the whites. And it takes a lot of time for people to process the grays. You have served it on a platter, but even then they're just like, even if you spoon feed us, we just believe that they are right, they are wrong. It's hard for them to accept the grays.
I don't think so. I've been very, very happy with the reactions to the film. Because the majority of the conversations that I see around the film are operating in the grace, and people seem to get it. I see so many reels on Instagram where people are talking about all the nuances we packed into the film, and people are talking about the grace in which we operate in. And on the other hand, I see people who have viewed this film through the lens of animus are breaking it down logically. And I'm not blaming it, I understand, I get it. I totally get it, I respect that feedback. Are largely breaking down the film logically and actually saying the film's too black and white. Why is it so black and white? Especially from Rahul, we expecting more nuance. I get that, I respect that. Because I think they are right. Because I could have gone more nuanced with it. There was an opportunity to, and I chose not to. So what they're saying is completely valid. But I think people who are viewing it through a lens of animus see how dense, complex, and nuanced the film actually is. And they are getting every bit of it. And I see so many conversations that are operating in the grey. Yes, you are going to have a certain section of the audience that is still going to continue to see it through black and white. And that's okay, I'm fine with that. And yet, they are also participating in this conversation. And that's fantastic. But I do think the majority reaction has been understanding the nuances, has been understanding what we're going for and why it is a film. It's so beautiful how many people have picked up the fact that it is a film about a narcissist and a doormat. And it goes beyond gender. You can reverse the genders in the films just as valid. I chose to say through this gender because, in my opinion, it is more common. I don't have any survey or statistics to back it up. I like to think it's far more common. And two, I know that if I choose to say the story through the other gender, it will be weaponized and contextualized in a manner where it becomes more than what it's trying to. As long as certain topics that were being discussed only by the intelligentsia, as long as those topics have been dragged into the mainstream, why we make this film, that purpose is achieved. So yeah, it's been fascinating some of the response. But I would like to think audiences today are ready. I would like to think for the first time in the history of Telugu cinema, we live in an era today where the audience actually has more cinema intelligence than producers and filmmakers. And I am scared if I will have the intelligence required to make films for this audience beyond the next 7 years. That's where I am. So I am all for constantly pushing it and saying, no, trust your audience and deliver the most superior film you can. Yes, there are certain things where I did make certain compromises in terms of how I wrote Bhooma like a Virgin Mary because I felt it would be too risky to not to, for example, make this film with Durga. And the story would have been just as valid, just as relevant if I made this film with Durga. But I wanted to make it with Bhooma and write it like a Virgin Mary because I didn't want to take a certain risk. Those were for certain specific sections where I wanted to start a conversation and a debate. But other than that, I think audiences today are ready and how. So I feel, the more we keep doubling down and playing it safe, we're actually taking a risk. Because they're consuming everything from anywhere and they have the cinema intelligence to understand any nuance before them. So,
In the movie, Bhooma is watching Aina, and as soon as she finishes watching it very subtly in a very low voice, she mentions how powerful her and Aina. So was that
she
intentional?
actually is a hero character, but yeah.
So was that a very intentional choice where you wanted Bhooma to relate with the father, another daughter?
She will. Who was like a Rapunzel in a sense? Rapunzel, right? Rapunzel is the one in the ivory tower. Yeah. It's just that she has a father instead of a mother. Um, the father, I know a lot of single parents who have this problem. For some, it is an actual mental health issue. For some, it's not. But this sense of possessiveness over the only child, as the only parent, as the only caregiver, how that it's almost like Stockholm syndrome for the child. That is the only perspective you are allowed to have growing up, and therefore every other perspective is very carefully you're brainwashed and conditioned to believe that every other perspective is wrong. And typically, such parents, it could be a mother, it could be a father in this case, they meticulously isolate the ward. They make sure that if they feel someone's coming too close for comfort, that this ward is making an emotional connect beyond the point that they're comfortable with, they tend to cut that person out of their lives. Sometimes very brutally, sometimes very emotionally violently. So it's weird how some of these children grow up always putting that single parent before themselves, and they look at everything through the point of view of their parents or their parent rather than themselves. Um, so in my head, it just made more sense for a Rapunzel like Uma, for whom her only caregiver in the world has offered her only one perspective, um, to ensure that he has absolute control over her, who would relate more to the father than the daughter. So it was a throwaway line, and I'm so happy when people are picking up on throwaway lines like this. I saw a few more Insta posts that also talk about this. So yeah, why I chose Hi Nana wasn't because of this, but the minute I chose Hi Nana, it just made sense for her to relate with the father's character, uh, who in this case is the hero, because she sees her father as her hero in her life. Little does she realize that the impact her father's had on her. She probably knows it deep down, which is why she begged him and convinced him really hard to come to Hyderabad. But she also suffers from Stockholm syndrome. So in that sense, yeah, it just made sense for me for her to say that rather than relate with the daughters.
A lot of people pick up on that dialogue, but nobody picks up on Vikram's follow-up dialogue, which is he says, ఇప్పుడు బయలుదేరితే నా పరిస్థితి కూడా హీరో పరిస్థితి. Like in a sense, you're foreshadowing the fact that he's going to take her father's place in her life. But yeah, please.
Was that like so when you have to do like started foreshadowing like this, how much of your mental energy goes into
Not much. These things are mostly flowing instinctively, right? You're not like breaking your head, spending a whole day trying to subtly foreshadow something. No, not at all. It's as you're writing instinctively in the flow, you're writing certain things that just make sense, that feels right for the character to say at that point. So no, not much. Not much. Maybe I should put in more effort. I don't know, but yeah.
but it's also nice that it happens very seamlessly. So we try putting more energy into it.
Yeah. Then I think the director starts popping up on screen. You don't want that. Or the writer starts popping up on screen. You don't want that. So it's better to keep it very subtle. And most of these little things that I put in, I don't even want the audiences to get it. I don't care if they don't get it. I don't want them to get it, because what is important for me is that the drama is working at a surface level. And beneath that, whatever I'm adding is why this film is told in a unique way, and is why this film starts getting more and more personal. And that is the function of these little things that you're putting in there, not for the audiences to get it. If they're getting it, amazing. If they're not, I'm perfectly fine with that. But what these little things help me do is, one, make this film unique. Without me trying, or organically, it starts developing a voice of its own, this film. And two, you're putting in one little jigsaw piece at a time to create perception of a character. So even if the audience isn't consciously picking something up, it is subconsciously creating perception of their character for the audience. The way someone talks, or the words they choose to use, or how they say it. For me, it's as important when I'm writing how a character is saying something as much as what they say. So it's constantly creating perceptions in the audience's mind, and that helps me make the audience like or dislike something a character does, or like a character completely, and things like that. So that is the more important part. And I believe this. I believe that Indians especially, because of the fact that we're a country of 1.4 billion people who live in India are forced to deal with all kinds of human beings for various reasons in a 24-hour day, more than, say, a European would or an American would. You're allowed to have more individual space in those societies because of the sheer lack of numbers. Just the physical space you can afford for yourself is a lot more. But when I step out of my house in a day, the number of people I'm forced to interact with is so much higher in India because of the density of population and just the sheer number of the population. Therefore, I believe that even if somebody is very immature, even if somebody is not very evolved or not very self-aware, I believe that they have a really strong EQ. Because you are forced to perceive so many people every given day of your life. You start in your gut, even if you're not able to process it consciously, you start in your gut developing very strong likes and dislikes for people. And you don't even know why. One meeting with a person as an Indian, you've already I like this person, I don't like this person. You've already developed that. Or even if you don't realize it, a person's eliciting a very strong negative emotional response in you or a very positive emotional response in you. Which is why some people put a smile on your face. Some people make you pale and they leave you with an energy that's so drained. And this EQ I feel is very, very high in Indians, subconsciously. So I love when I'm writing a character-driven drama, using that very high EQ Indians have in their gut to put little things in the story that help me develop a perception of the character or shape a perception of the character in the audience's minds. The genius of that essay, it's actually just an essay, it's not even a book, right? It's a 110-page essay that was published by Penguin as a book. The genius of that essay is, Virginia is actually keeping it very simple and surface level, right? Her relation to mental and emotional nourishment and how having a physical space of your own is communicated in a very bare bones manner. It isn't necessarily very layered, but it's effortlessly layered. Right? So there's two aspects to that book. One is how Virginia talks about the necessity for physical space in order for your mental and emotional faculties to be nurtured and for you to blossom into who you can really be. The other aspect of it is how it is so easy because it's written with such great understanding of human psyche. It's written with such great depth. It's very easy to assign that to beyond that physical space. Right? And what always spoke to me as a man who grew up in India, who's never lived abroad, and as a man who's observed so many women in my life, also growing up in India, for me it was always very easy for me to relate to the more abstract takeaways of that essay rather than the physical space itself. Like, I will tell you what impact that essay had on me when I read it as a mid-20s boy, right? I think that's when I read it for the first time. I was in this phase where I don't like how some men treat their women. And I would have open arguments about it with men in my own family. Because I was watching a certain kind of cinema that was opening my eyes to the fact that, hey, there are these women and I that live in the same house, that live in the same street, that live in the same society, and that live in the same nation and in the same world. But our worlds are so different even though we inhabit the same space. And I started becoming more keenly aware of it because of a certain kind of cinema I was watching, because of a certain kind of literature I was consuming at that age, in my early 20s, late teens. And that helped me develop empathy. And I would sit and have arguments with a lot of men about this. And ironically, with a lot of women about this. I feel that for generations, women have been brainwashed into becoming the strongest conveyor belts of patriarchy. Right? They brainwash subsequent generations of women more to conform to patriarchy than even the men do. The men have done their job. They've brainwashed the women. They carry it forward. They carry the baton. So I used to sit and have arguments with a lot of women and men about these changing worldviews that I was having at that point. And I would keep getting hit with something. Where they would tell me, Are, there is a reason why our elders structured society in a certain manner. There is a reason why our elders say, let the women, and they would say it with a lot of respect, and you would fall for it at that age. They would say there is a reason why women were only meant to do certain things and men were meant to do certain things. And it would almost sound respectful and okay. That they would say, biology and evolution has given us certain strengths and we need to put that to use. And they would say, look at it for example. Why did God make women the weaker sex physically? Because of a certain reason. They would always throw this at me. They would say, why are women not as good as men at literature, for example? The few women authors we have are exceptions. Why are, for example, chess, where it's not even physically demanding, why are women not as good as men in chess? Why are women not as good at driving as men? And they would throw these things at me, and it would be very convincing at that age. And then I read A Room of One's Own. And you know what my biggest takeaway from that essay was? I said, bloody hell, all these people had me brainwashed. I would always look at it, I would look at the symptoms, and I would think that was the disease, right? And that essay made me realize that's not the disease, it's the symptom. It's the symptom of something very deep-rooted that's been existing for centuries, where you snatch. I would look at the end result and say, yeah, maybe they're right. Women aren't, no woman can run a 100-meter sprint as fast as a man can. No woman can, there just aren't as many great female authors as there are men. There aren't as many, every walk of life. Men have been largely the greater achievers. And I would tell myself, maybe they're right, maybe they have a point, and I read this and I realized, oh damn, it is so deep-rooted. You go back down and you snatch something as basic as space. You ensure they're not nurtured. You ensure they don't blossom. And then you say, women who despite all that break through that glass ceiling and still become authors or become chess players or become someone who drives a car in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's a lot more common now. They're doing it despite. It's so loaded against them that to put the burden of also being ultra achievers is first of all stupid. And secondly, it's sheer numbers. And it opened my eyes to, hang on a second. There are so many men writing books. Not all of them are great. The majority is mediocre. So if you have, for example, 100 men writing books, there are 5 that are geniuses and there are about 80 that are mediocre and there are 50 that are just downright horrible. Now if you only have 5 women writing books, what are the chances that you're going to get a genius out of one of them? So I would tell them, this is the problem. It isn't that the disease isn't that women aren't as good as men in a lot of these fields. The disease is that we don't offer them a conducive environment where they can blossom and become as good as men are. So that was my biggest takeaway from A Room of One's Own, right? And so to me it was irrelevant how the Western world views that concept, and how, for me, that book was so important, because to every girl and to every man who's convinced with the same arguments by elders in your family, read that book, you will have an answer. Read that book, it will help you start thinking about it, and it'll make you realize how deep rooted not just the biases are, but the environment is where they're not allowed to thrive and prosper and flourish. So yeah. So for me, this is how I was thinking. I said, this is why I put that book in. So yeah. And it's so ironic that Vikram uses that book. Everybody keeps talking about ఆ ఒక్క రోజు ఆయన చూడకుండా ఉండాల్సింది భూమా. బట్ ది ట్రూత్ ఇస్ దట్ ఆ ఒక్క రోజు ప్రొఫెసర్ సుధీర్ ఆ బుక్ సజెస్ట్ చేయకుండా ఉండాల్సింది, తను ఆ బోర్డు మీద రాయకుండా ఉండాల్సింది. వీళ్ళని ఆ బుక్ లైబ్రరీలో తీసుకొని he was able to engineer a situation where she comes and talks to him, because he realizes the way the first conversation went, and he realizes the way this girl is, no matter how much I try to break the ice, I'm not going to be able to. She's just going to turn her face and walk away.
To Durga, because he knows that he can't exert control on her. She's not someone who conform. In fact, she'll call out his behavior. But at the same time, what made you think that Durga is actually attracted to him?
I know, it's finally someone brings it up. I wasn't fully comfortable with how I had explored that on screen. The truth is that I didn't have the space. So I couldn't fully explore it. So in my head, this girl who's done her grad in UCLA, and the backstory I gave Anu was that your parents live in the US, you were born and raised in the US in a Telugu family, but your grandparents live in India, and around the time you finish your graduation, your granddad dies. And you've always been very close to your grandmom and your granddad. They keep coming to the US, or you keep going there for summer holidays and all that. And you really have a good time every time you come to India and spend time at your grandmom's place for your summer holidays. So the minute your granddad dies and you realize your parents can't uproot from the US and shift with your grandmom, you take a call that you're going to do your postgrad in India. You take a call that you're going to come and live with your grandmom in India. So she's actually a day scholar. She's not a hosteler. So she sometimes late in the night, sometimes she might stay back at a friend's place in the hostel, but largely she goes back to her grandmom's place, and she's a day scholar. So in my head, she looks at Vikram, and she's a contemporary, and the whole film's happening in 2023 or 22 or whatever, whenever it is that Hi Nana and Salah released that year. So in my head, she's probably been exposed to a certain kind of men in the US, and she's probably moved around in circles where the men were very progressive, very woke, and never so brash. But the first time she sees him, there's this one animal attraction probably, and in her head she finds him exotic, and she probably develops this attraction for him. At that point, that's all it is, right? And in her head, end of the day, she is also a 22, 23-year-old, even though she's a lot more composed and self-aware. When it comes to us, we make the worst choices. We have the worst lapses of judgment. So in her head, she's a girl who's always had her way with men. She's probably, what I would keep telling Anu is that there's probably never been a guy, whatever his ethnicity in the US, you've probably had a crush on a white man, a black man, or an Indian man, or whoever it is. If you have a crush on a man, you know you're going to get reciprocation, because you're this diva, and you've always had your way with men. And there's this one weird animal attraction that you have for him the first time you see him. You find him exotic. Someone so brash who was able to dance like that. And your parents have always played Telugu films for you growing up, but you were never really exposed to that environment. And you find him like one of those heroes that you see in all these films. So there's this stupid crush/attraction. But as that first year goes on, and we skip the story, then the story restarts after the prologue, it's 1 year later, because I'm telling Bhooma's story. So in my head, the gaps that I'm filling were that it's this animal attraction, that's it. You're probably not even intending to act on it. But the more signals you give him, the more you realize he doesn't reciprocate. And then it starts becoming the thrill of the chase thing for you. Then for the first time,
this exotic guy who isn't even at the same level as the men you've dated in your life, and you're shocked that he's not reciprocating. And you're like, wait a minute, what the heck? How, why, and how is this guy not reciprocating? So it becomes like a stupid, silly thing for you, where there is this thrill of the chase for you. And you're snapped out of it when you see him fall for Bhooma and you realize, oh, that's why he'd never fall for me. And that wakes you up from your slumber. So is that convincing or not? I don't know. And I'm pretty sure it wasn't too convincing because I didn't have the space to explore it. So I'm glad it gave me a chance to sort of, fill in those blanks myself.
I think twice or thrice, Bhooma, whenever she goes to her room, she gets into the fetal position and then sleeps.
Yeah.
Or even while lying down, she just curls up. How did you get down to that part of okay, there'll be a void and she's just curling up in a
Probably the least nuanced choice. It's such a. We've seen it in other films before. We've read it in literature before. I've experienced it in my own life before, and I've seen it secondhand with so many, especially women, where how they just curl up in a ball where there's so much angst and frustration inside, but you don't know how to express it, and you start withdrawing, and you start going inward, and you start getting even more silent about it. It's the most natural thing in the world, where it's just such a striking representation of that state of mind, that emotional state, curling up into a ball and going into a fetal position. And for me also, like a lot of characters in the film, like Vikram in the film, most of Bhooma's problems, most of her inadequacies, most of her flaws stem from her unresolved childhood patterns. So it just made so much sense. If you look at it, her mother dies at childbirth, and she's grown up without a feminine presence in her life, without anima in her life. It's been all animus. And so it goes back there. Even before that, it goes back in the womb, right? So a life-changing incident in her life is that as she was coming out of her mother's womb, her mother's life had to be sacrificed for it. So everything is so unresolved from that moment in her life. So it just made sense for that pattern to keep continuing. And every time there's a problem, she curl up into a ball and go into a fetal position. So yeah.
As the writer, the female friendship angle of Bhooma and Durga, because my thesis is based on female friendships
Lovely.
in the television setting. Now that I have a different kind of construct in my head about female friendships, and a lot of the time, two women are pitted against each other, and maybe early times to now, the expression of solidarity comes really different in different languages and mediums. And as for Durga and Bhooma, I noticed that once they started getting close, I could see that Bhooma wanted to open up, and it was her pure heart that she took a big leap of faith even while asking for help. She was very hesitant.
Right.
And once they started getting close, be it on the stage or in the entire auditorium while they were having conversations, I don't know if it's anger or disgust that Vikram has on his face, that he could see those two getting close. What exactly was going on in his head? Was he
It was
shocked?
distrust and more discomfort than anything else. Like, hang on a second,
How did this happen?
how did this happen? I know this girl likes me. Will she start poisoning Bhooma against me, or is she going to behave herself? Is she even being genuine with Bhooma, or is she acting like she's becoming a friend just to manipulate her out of a relationship with me so that she can get me? In his self-centered narcissism, this is what's going on in his head. So this is what I was telling Dikshit when I said look at her with suspicion. That if you notice the adjective I'd like to give that look is suspicion. Like, hang on a second. Why are you doing this? Why are you getting close to Bhooma? What is the card you're playing? What are you up to? So it was that should I let this be, or should I do something about this? Are you what are your intentions? So that was the look.
I think he had a subtle expression of fear when he saw Bhooma on the stage that quite literally turned into some sort of anger, if I
You mean when you talk about when just Durga and Bhooma are on the stage talking to each other, or during the play?
during the play.
Okay.
I could sense a subtle amount of fear where everyone were clapping and he just looks at them and then he tries to dim her light by passing the most nasty comment
Oh,
ever.
yeah. How good is Dixit in that scene? My God. It's
It's
not fear.
Yeah.
It's not fear. What I was saying, Dixit was contempt and disgust. First, that these boys who are at that point, I don't want to reveal that you. If you notice, he's a sweet guy. He's not jealous of Bhooma. So it starts out where the minute Bhooma walks into the stage for the first time in the play, he's actually smiling. He's smiling and he's like, "Oh, nice, my girlfriend's doing something."
But the minute
But the minute he
outshines-
sees so many
Yeah.
men clapping and cheering at her, the only thing he can think of is, why do you need this? Are you really enjoying this? Is this why you're doing it? He can't wrap his head around why else would you want to do it? He can't wrap his head around you want to develop confidence, you want to explore yourself as an actor, you want to do theatre, or more than anything, it's for Bhooma, it isn't even all that, it's wanting to express herself, wanting to become self-confident. He doesn't get all that because he's shallow and his understanding of Bhooma is shallow. So in his head, the only thing he can think of is, look at all these men clapping and cheering. I find this vulgar that you are exhibiting yourself so that these men can clap and cheer for you. Aren't you getting uncomfortable? It's that contempt, it's that disgust. So that's what he comes out and talks about. Funny shot of him smiling very warmly at her was to break that notion. I remember telling Dixit, no, first shot, you give me that, make that, he was giving me a very Vikram smile. I said, no, don't give me a Vikram smile. I don't want people to think it's jealousy because jealousy then it oversimplifies it. It's very easy for a man to get jealous and it's very cliched also. From Silsila we've been, not Silsila, sorry, which movie is that? Abhiman. From Abhiman we've been talking about male jealousy and things like that. So I said that's too cliche. For me, even more nuanced territory to deal with, and for most men, it is that. They're not jealous of their girlfriends. They can't stand the fact. They can only, like, when you wear a certain kind of clothes in their head, you're wearing it only so that you get male attention. Why? What kind of a slut are you? That is their thought process. They can't wrap their head around you're probably wearing it because it's your way of expressing yourself, or you're probably wearing it because it's just fucking comfortable. So for him, it was never jealousy, which is why I told Dixit, give me a genuinely warm, appreciative smile. So that it was a longer montage, maybe it would have, I had so much pressure from the team to trim it down, but it was a longer montage, so maybe it would have registered clearer if it was a longer montage. But if you even now that shot is there of him smiling very warmly at her, it's when everybody starts clapping that he's like, really, is this what you want?
Change of expression is what I interpreted as, okay, maybe he's jealous or maybe he's insecure given how
I don't
much
mind if you interpret it that way. These are things that I like leaving open to interpretation. So I'm okay with that. But yeah, he means it when he comes out and says, నీకు ఇదే నచ్చుతుంది కదా నువ్వు నోటకి చేసుకుంటే వీళ్ళందరూ నీకోసం క్లాప్ కొట్టడం నీకు అటెన్షన్ కావాలి కదా is all that he means. And if you notice this little nuance I love, I remember and he owned it so well. I told Dixit, when you're talking about the fact that her cleavage could be seen on stage, I want one, usually throughout the film he has one button open, which is why the senior in the very first scene says first day ne first button open. నువ్వు చేస్తే హీరోయిజం నువ్వు చేస్తే నువ్వు స్టడ్ అమ్మాయిది బై మిస్టేక్ కనబడితే స్లట్ అనేది పాయింట్. సో అది ఫస్ట్ సీన్ నుంచే ఎస్టాబ్లిష్ చేసుకోవచ్చా. యూ విల్ నెవర్ ఫైండ్ అ సింగిల్ సీన్ ఇన్ ద మూవీ వేర్ ద ఫస్ట్ బటన్ ఇస్ నాట్ ఓపెన్. అండ్ ఇన్ దట్ సీన్ ఐ సీ కీప్ 2 buttons open. And his shirt is like this, and it's like it's a little more open than in any other scene. And he says, "Here you are, you got your shirt open. Now if I come and tell you you're doing it only for female attention and you're a gigolo, how would you feel? You'd laugh it off." That's exactly how it is for a woman too, man, right? So for them, it's the most natural thing in the world. It's a part of their body. It's not their fault that we've managed to sexualize it. So, and we are putting the pressure on them to cover it up, right? So it's like, imagine if all the women turned around tomorrow and said, my God, we are getting unbelievably turned on by the hair on your head. We immediately need you to cover it up, otherwise it's getting the worst out of us. We want to start molesting if you don't cover up your hair, and they start forcing us to cover our hair. How stupid would that be for us? I'd be like, F off, I'm not covering my hair unless I feel like. It's the same for a woman, right? It's a very natural part of their body. We have sexualized it, we have hyper-sexualized it, and we force them to cover up, and they still largely conform. They're like, okay man, fine, I'll cover it up. And yet, by mistake, once
I made it a point to not show it. I didn't want to actually have a shot where she falls down and the cleavage can be seen. I said, no, I don't want to show it. So, and as he's saying all that, he's got 2 buttons open and his shirt is like this. So.
Yeah, the woman, that's something I couldn't really recognize. I was just like, okay, wait, what cleavage? She's wearing something up to here. What did I miss?
No, there is a scene that I deliberately didn't want to show. For X number of reasons, for very regressive reasons, unfortunately. But in my head, I felt like I show that scene how certain sections of the audience see Bhooma from that point to be very different. They won't take Bhooma's side. They won't be able to empathize with her. They will have, how no Mariala Kanaparte, Yavadane said their boyfriend, Antaru, so Woddu, and Shubin's
Oblivious of the fact that my mother is just like this.
Yeah.
You should be glad that
That's how normalized this was.
And not for once did you normalize or glorify it. You just gave as it is.
Yeah.
Was there any instant where you wanted to give a little more of, like, you know, if there are qualities of his mother that he learned? Because looks like she is really quiet, but at the same time, I do believe in that Oedipus and Electra complex. Like, what if he was close to his mother? Would he be more gentle like her?
I think he is close to his mother in his own weird way.
Yeah.
And that extends to his relationship with his girlfriend as well. See, unfortunately or fortunately, he was raised in an environment where he's observed his father exert authority. So in his head, the most common thing in the world is when 2 people love each other, the man provides protection. He sets the rules, he sets the ground for what is okay and what is not okay. And the woman will very, very beautifully, very affectionately fulfill all his needs. This is his idea of an ideal relationship between a man and a woman, right? And because of how his father is, from even before the time he was born, and certainly before the time he could start sensing things around him, his mother is being literally and figuratively beaten into this one personality where she doesn't express herself, which is what attracts, which is what makes him find Bhooma attractive in the first place, right? So now, the first thing she does, the first moment of attraction for him is when she is nursing his wounds. That is his first moment of attraction for Bhooma.
He says it right there.
He said it absolutely. So for him, is like the most beautiful ideal through his rose-tinted lens is a man who is the knight in shining armor, who will protect the house like a man with valor, and will discipline his woman when he needs to, because it's so normal. My mom and my dad love each other, and it is perfectly normal for my dad as an expression of that love to beat my mom and to keep her in check when it is needed. This is the hollow relationship he's seen growing up, and this is his idea of love. This is his idea of a man-woman partnership. So it was obviously going to extend to him, right? So for me, in his own weird, twisted way, he is close to his mom. He loves his mom. I will love my mother, I will protect my mother, and in return, she will fulfill all my needs. She will be my nanny / maid / cook / everything, right? And in Bhooma, he sees the same thing. So the 2 songs, if you notice, is exactly that. Is Bhooma initially willingly and wittingly becoming his nanny / mom / maid / cook. And in the second song, she's now stuck in that life and doing it lifelessly and doesn't know how to snap out of it. And Vikram is so oblivious that he doesn't even realize there's something wrong because he never once cares to look at her eyes in the Nadive song. Why? Because he's grown up watching his mom with those same dead eyes. And to him, yeah, that is their fulfillment of their duties in this relationship. What does a man and a woman bring to a relationship? When is it called a love story? It's when a woman brings these things and a man brings these things. So in his head, I am even better than my father. Because I love my mother, I will never hit my mother like my father. Therefore, I will never hit Bhooma also. Like my father, I will never abuse Bhooma. Wow, what a boyfriend I have. So, which is why it is a rude short time when Bhooma says, I'm not happy with you. So in his own weird way, he thinks he's close to his mom. But because of how his mom is, he would have never been able to express more than that. And he would have never been able to express more than that. It is very shallow, the exact opposite of a self-aware man. So how else was that relationship going to be? And therefore, how else was this relationship with Bhooma going to be? So if you've seen your father treat your mother with respect, if you've seen your father care about your mother's feelings, you are going to care about your mother's feelings too. Otherwise, you are going to, not always, at a certain age you can snap out of it. I like to think, I have high hopes that Vikram would snap out of it. I have high hopes that thanks to this experience with Bhooma, thanks to that climax, and thanks to she teams coming and grabbing hold of him because of what he did on the door and counseling him, I'd like to think Vikram would have snapped out of this, become more self-aware, and started treating his mother better, and therefore become a better husband to whoever he marries tomorrow. I have hopes. So in my head, how else is he going to be? Yeah. Collision between two men fighting for control over her life. So that was different. So left to three people: Harshita, Vinay, and Durga. So in my head, this textbook behavior of a narcissist cutting out everyone from your life. With Vinay, he proactively cuts Vinay out of her life. Right? With Harshita, because of how decent Harshita is, she slowly starts receding from her life. And there was something in a song where it is mentioned, I'm so glad you brought it out, but I was given a lot of feedback from the team to trim the first half a little bit, so I trimmed that first song. In that first song, there is a moment where he tells his friends, he says, he realizes instinctively Bhooma is someone in a shell. So the first thing he does is he says, first Amma is comfortable chadam, mere kuda andra. So what he does is when she is with her friend, he takes his friend and makes the two gangs get introduced to each other. And then there was this scene in the song that he edited out of the film where he tells the friends, Bhooma's coming, I'm going to go talk to her, and they say, do you need us? And he says, no, she's become comfortable. Very soon, so I don't need you guys, very soon I'll cut Harshita also out. Okay? And the friends say, wow, bade sketches are asal mark kuda nerpinchina ante. And normal as a bit. So then he starts going and meeting, now it's unsaid in the film, he starts going and meeting Bhooma when Harshita's there next to her. So that Bhooma's comfortable. And then slowly when Bhooma's comfortable enough and trusts him enough that he's not going to make a move, that I'm safe with this guy, he starts meeting her alone. Right? So this was the process. And it got cut out of the film. I do mention it once. But even otherwise, the idea was that because of how decent human being Ashita is, she starts by choice receding from Bhooma's life herself. So Vinay, he's cut out. Harshita is receding by herself. With Durga, she is the one he will not have power over because she knows. She knows he's doing this to her and she won't let him cut her out of Bhooma's life. But ironically, in an agitated state, not knowing which side to take and who to trust, Bhooma makes a terrible choice and she herself cuts Durga out of her life. So that is the heartbreaking irony I wanted to get out there. These three people, one he cuts out, one cuts herself out, and one Bhooma ironically cuts out of her own life. And makes the job easier for Vikram because Vikram's probably scratching his head thinking, how do I, the next thing he would have done, and Durga senses this. Which is why she says, ఇది నేనే నీకు చెప్పేస్తాను ఇది విక్రమ్ చెప్పి నువ్వు తెచ్చుకుంటే నువ్వు నన్ను ఇంకా హేట్ చేస్తావు because she knows Vikram will eventually throw this at Bhooma saying be careful with Durga, she tried to poison you, she used to like me, she still likes me, she will try to cut both of us out. She knows that Vikram will eventually play that card, so that's why she comes clean. So that was the irony. So everything was very consciously thought of, it wasn't something that just we stumbled upon.
I saw a lot of them saying that he hasn't exploited her. She had a say in it. But I don't understand why people are not it's not comprehensive for them that relationship dynamics are so subjective. And every time I love the fact that there's this timestamp that keeps coming on whenever he walks out of the room. But you're clearly not showing what happens inside the room, which is great because it makes it easier for people to point fingers at.
Right.
Even then at the last scene they did point it out you agreed to it. So
and it is true. It was in a
consensual.
Weird sense consensual. It's such a grey area. If you look at the kiss, the way it's choreographed, would you call it consensual or non-consensual? If you look at Bhooma, you see fear in her eyes. You see she's frozen. Everybody has, what do they call it, flight or
Fight more.
Flight or fight, but it's usually when you're faced with horror, it's flight or freeze that I would like to say, and she freezes. You can see that she's gently trying to push him away, but she doesn't have the strength because she's wobbly kneed. She doesn't have the strength to push him away. You can see all that. So, consensual, not consensual, I leave it to you. I wanted to leave it open to interpretation. But the one thing I was sure was that I didn't want Vikram to become physically abusive. Because when I was writing this film, I said, I'm writing a film about. Anu put it beautifully, right? I finished writing the film and she put it beautifully and she said, just physically abusing someone that isn't the only kind of abuse. Dulling someone's shine is abuse as well.
Wow.
And you've portrayed that beautifully. These were Anu's words. And this is what I was going for without being able to put it in as many words. But for me, there have been films about physical abuse. What is the point in making another film? And it is today accepted, thankfully, universally that it is wrong. There are no two ways about it. At least today it's not black and white. It is looked down upon. It is criminal. Right? It is by law defined as criminal. So I wasn't trying to make a film about those extremes. I was trying to make a film about these in-betweens where it's so difficult to express yourself and say this is a problem. Where so many people that suffer these problems in a relationship suffer it so silently that silence itself becomes your biggest issue. The burden of carrying that silence becomes your biggest problem. So I was dealing with those areas. So for me it was very important. Rasmika kept telling me I'm making this film because I wanted to be a big hug to boomers out there. I kept saying I'm making this film because I want at least 5 Vikrams to go back home and think. Changing them is not in my hands, but making them think is in my hands. I want them to go back home and think. Thankfully, that number is a lot more than 5 based on all the feedback I've gotten. But I didn't want to give Vikrams in the theatre even one excuse to disassociate themselves from Vikram and say, but I don't do that, so I'm okay, I'm not a Vikram. No, I wanted to make them so uncomfortable, so unrelentingly that I wanted to force them to go back home and wonder if they're a Vikram. Without giving you the crutch of one excuse, when I've taken Vikram to an extreme, and it becomes easy for them to say, no, but I don't hit you, so I'm a good boyfriend or I'm a good husband. So I didn't want to give them even that one outlet. And it's so fascinating that I never took him to an extreme anywhere, and yet people keep saying, అబ్బాయిని మాత్రం సైకోలాగా రాసుకున్నాడు, అబ్బాయిని మాత్రం అవుట్ రైట్ ఇంత సైకోలా రాస్తాడు. ఏం సైకోలా రాశాడు రా? వాడు కొడతాడా, తిడతాడా? Does he go around sleeping with other women? నేను అంత సైకోలా ఏం రాసుకున్నాను? But I love the fact that it's made them so uncomfortable. It's triggered them so much that they're saying ఇంత సైకోలా రాశాడు. I'm like, ఇది నువ్వు సైకో అని ఒప్పుకున్నావంటే fantastic, my job is done. I don't think he's a psycho. These are minor traits that you can talk to and sort out. But this is where I wanted the film to belong, in these spaces. So never once did I forget. I didn't even contemplate it. Because I knew I didn't want to go there. And even the post-breakup behavior. You take the same story to an extreme, what Vikram does with that door. Now, 10 out of 100 Vikrams are capable of going that far. For example, just throwing a random number. It's not backed by any data. Don't come back to me with. But let's say 10 out of 100 Vikrams are going that far in terms of slut shaming her in one way or another. 1 out of 10 such Vikrams is capable of going as far as acid attacks and honor rapes and honor, I'm so sorry for trigger warning, but honor killings and you slept with me, now how dare you go marry another guy and sleep with him, you bitch, so I will pour acid on you. That is the extreme, right? Again, I didn't want to deal with the extremes. I wasn't making a film about the extremes. This slut shaming a woman post a breakup is wrong. Violating her, even though it's now in the past. The fact that a woman got physically intimate with you, whether it was of her own willingness or your cornering her into it, is her trust in you. Going and telling the whole world that is wrong, that is something you don't see in cinema. That is the space I wanted to operate in. So I didn't want to take it as extreme as, he starts physically maiming her and stuff like that. So yeah. So that was the reason I never wanted to dial up Vikram any more than this. And for that, people are telling me he's so one note and he's psycho and so yeah. So.
It's absolutely weird that people can't comprehend what is psycho and what is not. There were movies that had men behaving absolutely psychotic and they just...
Shah Rukh Khan in Dar is psycho. Vikram in The Girlfriend isn't psycho, he's just problematic. So, yeah.
I have. The last one is about Shravya Verma's costume design. Her post, she had a long one explaining about the florals and how hope plays a role in all of it. Uh, this question applies either way, like how much of you as a director and how much of her as a costume designer did you guys discuss, and what if her inputs influenced your decision and you thought, oh, that's actually nicer than
Oh,
what
lots
I
of
thought.
times. Lots of times. Yeah, lots of times. Sorry, yeah.
Yes, I just wanted examples of when exactly did that happen, and how do you think this collaboration impacted?
It's so important to see, end of the day, you don't want your film to stop how well you can make it, stop at how well you can make it, right? You want to get in technicians who will elevate it beyond that and taking it into a sphere where you can't reach by yourself. So it is very important to me. Like I told you at the very beginning, I believe in making all my HODs stakeholders in film. I believe in giving them agency and ownership. And it is very important that they feel that they own their craft and it is respected, that they will start putting in effort. They will go beyond the brief, they will go beyond the paycheck and start putting in effort. They take their craft and say, how can I tell the story through my craft? And those are the little things that enhances a film, right? So for me, like with KV, like with my sound designer, like with my editor, like with Prashant Vihari, like with Hesham Abdul Wahab, I sent Shravya the script, I got her to read it, and then we had very detailed discussions about it. I had a discussion where I vomited everything I have in mind. And then I let her get back to me. And she came back to me with so many interesting insights. And she was the one HOD that was a woman as well. So she had such lovely, rich insights about the film, about the character and things like that. So there were lots of places where she was now taking it to a level higher than how I could have imagined how costumes enhanced the narrative of this film, the storytelling of this film. So massive props to her. I mean, there were so many times when she would give me ideas like, hey, that makes a lot of sense, Shravya, I like this, let's do this. And there will be times where, once you have committed, involved, invested HODs coming in, your job becomes making sure they don't stray too far. Because each craft will have a vision of its own, and that agency and autonomy you want to give your HOD for that craft. But at the same time, all of them need to come together in a certain way where they are achieving a common objective. So that you are the only one, who's on top of all those things. So while you want all your HODs to run with their craft and elevate it, as long as they're not going astray where you're like, but this element will be a stumbling block in all of them coming together, then you tell them, no, this isn't working, this is working. So other than that, you start getting HODs like that, it's beautiful. I mean, I will tell you this film will not be what it is without Shravya Verma, without Krishnan Vasant, without Prashant Vihari, without Hesham, without Chota Prasad, without Manoj, without my mixing engineer, Kanan sir. So it's something meaningful happens only when people, without Ram and Mona, how can I forget my production designers, without Ram and Mona, most importantly, without Raken Dumoli, the beauty he brought to the storytelling of this film. So I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but all these people literally came in and started giving it their all. They started pouring their heart and soul. And that is the only way you can make meaningful cinema. That is the only way now so many people are responding to the film at a very subliminal level, and they coming and saying it's healing them, and it was like therapy and it was cathartic. It's because all these people came in and put in their best. One guy can't make a film, that is the truth. And this film, if you think this film was beautiful, then I know you do, it's because all these people came in and made their contribution. So. At one point, Ram Gopal Verma and Maniratnam to me were in my little cocoon. I was a frog in the well, and in my little cocoon, they were the greatest filmmakers in the world. I was like, it is impossible for any filmmaker in the world to be greater than them. Ram Gopal Verma and Maniratnam were that for me. And obviously, you start getting older, you start getting exposed to cinema from around the country, from around the world. You start watching Ghatak and Adu Gopalakrishnan and Aravindan and Ray and so many of these guys. And initially you don't even understand what the fuss is, and then you start watching these films and you understand the genius of these films, and so many more filmmakers. And you start realizing, oh, cinema is more than just Maniratnam and Ram Gopal Verma. And then you start getting exposed to world cinema. And then there is this filmmaker called Hanaka that you watched, and he slowly starts becoming a greatest filmmaker of all time. So in your head, the pure, beautiful memory of watching Shiva and Nayagan is so sacred in my head. It is such a beautiful memory that I dare not watch it again to realize, oh, some portions aged, or oh, it's in my head, it's so much bigger and better than it is. I don't even want to take that risk. Those two films are so sacred and seminal in my life that maybe subconsciously I avoid watching them again. I don't know, but yeah. Thank you, and thank you for that lovely piece. I started with that and I'll end with that. Thank you.